All right. And it's maybe a little loud there. This is The Grass is Greener on WXRW 104.1 FM in Milwaukee. I am the host of the program, Gary Grass. With me is my co-host, Babette Gruneau.
Hi, and I'll wait for our guest to arrive to introduce our guest. For right now, I just wanted to say that we've been doing a lot of things to do with Palestine, and there's been people who've been going off to Madison to lobby. There's been protests. There is now going to be a book discussion on boycott, divestment, sanctions, the struggle for Palestinian civil rights. It's a book by Amar Barghouti, and a group here in Milwaukee will be hosting it, hosted by Water and Life Autonomous Campaign. And it will be tomorrow, actually.
So read fast.
May 7th at May 7th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at the Cactus Club, 2498 South Wentworth Avenue in Milwaukee. Okay. It's a free event.
Okay, and you should know that our guest is here in the room. So
okay.
You can introduce him.
All right. Now that our guest is here, I will do that. We have Abayomi Azikiwe tonight. He is the editor of the Pan-African Newswire and a contributor of the Black Agenda Report, independent analyst and journalist. He's a friend of our show, and he has contributed to many shows on the air. Welcome, Abayomi Azikiwe.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's always good to have you. You're our go-to guy for anything in Africa. I know that you've got a wide skill set. I actually was reading, Betsy, your resume at muckrack.com, and she was very impressed. We didn't know all these things about you, so you're a very impressive guy. It's great to have you always. Today we wanted to talk about get an update on the Sahel, and particularly on Burkina Faso.
Yes.
You can hear Betsy's chair squeak, can't you?
Unfortunately, my
your earphones
are not working.
Well, we got to get Zav out here to fix that then, because you need to hear Abayomi to participate in this discussion.
Yeah, I did want to ask him about Comandante. I think that's what his name.
Captain
Traore. I probably massacred his name, but he has been getting a lot of attention lately because of some of his policies that have annoyed various Western countries, whether it's France or the U.S. So maybe you can explain a little bit more what it's all about.
What has happened over the last 5 years is that there's been a series of military coups by lower-ranking military officers in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and Niger. And through a succession of events, they have come to the conclusion that France and the United States are not helping in regard to its own regional security. And they have formed their own alliance of Sahel states. There are plans to develop a 5,000 person military force for the entire AES region. The reforms that have been instituted include the nationalization of the mining industries inside the country, the expulsion of the French Foreign Legion troops, and with respect to Niger, the dismantling of a United States Pentagon drone station, which was based in Niger, which is one of the largest uranium-producing countries in the world. These are some of the reforms that are going on. They've shifted their alliance from France and the U.S. To the Russian Federation, which has caused great consternation on the part of the Western imperialist states, particularly the U.S. and France. So these are some of the developments that have caused a lot of friction between the West and the AES states.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of things, and I mean, I think you hit the most, probably the most pressing things, right? I mean, there's been this big, first of all, there's been the big sort of economic movement, which has been, um, you know, more self-sufficiency in agriculture, reducing like the export of just raw materials that are being extracted from the country, and building up plants to process things there, whether it's tomatoes or cotton, or whether it's gold.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these you know. Put in local value, give local people jobs, renegotiate contracts so that there's more local input. A lot of like kind of like standard classic things that you'd want to do to develop your country. And it's and now you have a situation right now where, I mean, you have the suspension by Trump of funding the USAID. You've got the head of the African Command, showing up before Congress and lamenting the fact that the U.S. its power is waning in this area, that they don't have the USAID to rely on anymore, and China and Russia are going to move in, and Russia's already moved in. So you get to have this. It sounds like just like a panic from the United States. I mean, even though the dominant force there was mostly France, the U.S. is like, oh no, we're losing Africa.
Yes, and that is a major cause of concern on the part of Washington as well as Paris and other Western states that have power within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. In Burkina Faso, just a little over 2 weeks ago, there was supposed to have been a military coup d'etat. It was thwarted by the existing government headed by Captain Ibrahim Traore. And when that was halted, the leadership in the country called for international mobilizations in defense of the revolutionary process that's going on there. That happened on April the 30th, which was last week, and there were huge demonstrations in Burkina Faso throughout the Sahel states, as well as other countries throughout the continent, and even internationally. Even in this country, there were several demonstrations in solidarity with Burkina Faso. So these developments have been taking place pretty rapidly. And what's at stake is the future of the continent, because if this process begins to be replicated in other states, it could be problematic. For example, Chad, which has been very close to the U.S. and France for decades, just several months ago claimed it was going to ask French forces to leave.
It's
We had a
problematic
similar
for the former colonial countries, but it's potentially great news for any of the African countries who are trying to finally throw off the colonialist or neo-colonial governments.
Presidents, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That's why it's so important. And when you have a situation where they have withdrawn, for example, from the Economic Community of West African States, is a 15-member economic alliance that's been in existence for the last 50 years, and they withdrew from it because they said it was too controlled by the West and formed their own alliance. And also, we have
Well,
developments
I mean,
taking place.
ECOWAS
Yeah.
was what ECOWAS wanted to, mobilize, an army to go in and restore the pre-coup leadership in those countries, right? I mean, there was,
In Niger.
yeah,
Yeah, that was the plan. In 2023, they had a coup there on July 26th, and it brought into power the Committee for the Safeguard of the Homeland, the CNSP, and they were having huge rallies inside the country. They were calling for major reforms, and ECOWAS, then under the leadership of Nigeria, which is the most populated state in Africa, attempted to mobilize a military force, a regional force, to go in and overthrow the CNSP and reinstall Mohamed Bazoum, who was the quote, elected, unquote, president of Niger, who was very close to the U.S. and to France. That proposal did not go anywhere. Even in Nigeria itself, his own party, the All Progressives Congress, they control the Senate in the Nigerian parliament, and they, of course, rejected it. And other forces rejected it throughout the West Africa region. So they have other methods they're using now to try to destabilize the government and the security, national security of Burkina Faso is primary right now as this process continues to unfold.
I mean, there've been a series of. I mean, this most recent coup attempt, I got a lot more, I think, attention on social media than previous, things like this. But I mean, there have been previous like assassination attempts and coup attempts in Burkina Faso, just in this period since 2022.
Yes, and the rebel groups that are fighting there, who claim to be Islamic oriented, are not clear in terms of what their program is for the country. And that whole process is being replicated as well in Niger, along with Mali. Mali, the fighting has been quite intense, particularly in the northern region of the country. So, yeah, these are very, very important developments that are taking place in the AES region. In that region, we have to keep in mind that all three countries are landlocked. So, this is a major impediment in regard to international trade. Yet, they are rich with numerous resources. Talk about Burkina Faso, they're like the fourth largest producer of gold on the African continent. In
But it
Mali,
used
they
to all
produce.
be just extracted and taken out and processed elsewhere, right?
Yeah, that's why they're right now are nationalizing the gold mines. They also broke in Niger. They broke relations in terms of the agreements they had signed with France because they pretty much control the uranium resources in the country. And Niger is one of the largest producers of uranium in the world. I believe the eighth largest producer.
Wow.
So all these strategic minerals and metals are indispensable
I,
to the world imperialist system.
yeah, I mean, there's lithium in that region too. I mean, it really is a place that has a lot of stuff that the West wants. We just want to just take the stuff and go. Um, it's I mean, it feels like there's so much going on here. I remember back when this series of coups all occurred. I mean, I think there's a natural feeling, I think, in the West, right, that if you have a military coup and it sets up some sort of junta, right, you immediately become suspect. Like, this is anti-democratic. This is a horrible thing, right? We should have elected leaders in all these countries, and I think we need to address the question of, whether that is a strong, valid criticism of any of these countries, because you're seeing stuff like now from the human rights organizations coming down and starting to like really kind of focus on attacking Burkina Faso and accusing them of all sorts of different things, right? But I think there is you have to really approach this carefully because, on the one hand, we don't want to impose like a completely formalistic, kind of hollow, Eurocentric model of democracy has to be this, popular power has to be this. But on the other hand, you need to have something from those countries that shows you that it is not just some sort of completely authoritarian, self-centered regime, and that there is some avenue for the popular will to express itself.
Yes, I think that we have to analyze these military seizures of power based upon the politics behind them. In certain cases, there have been military takeovers that have been progressive and even revolutionary. We look back at what happened in Egypt in 1952 with the coming to power of the officers group. And again in 1954, when Gamal Abdel Nasser consolidated power, we could look at what happened in Burkina Faso, in fact, in 1983, 42 years ago, when Captain Thomas Sankara took over and changed the name of the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, the land of the upright people. And there have been other instances of progressive and even revolutionary seizures of power in Africa. Uh, just because there is a civilian regime doesn't necessarily mean that it's democratic. There have been instances where, for example, in Guinea, where the previous civilian government extended its tenure of office in contravention to the Constitution. What do you do in a situation like that? Where you have popular uprisings and then a military seizure of power. So it depends upon the character, the political character of these developments in African countries. In Senegal, which is also in the West Africa region, it's not a landlocked country. They had an electoral process in 2023, 2024 that resulted in the ascendancy of President Faye. And he has made progressive pronouncements. He claims he wants the French troops to leave. Their trajectory is different than what's going on in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Yet at the same time, it still is promoting a progressive orientation. So you have different forms of expression in regard to democratic politics, anti-imperialist politics. So we have to judge them based upon the actual character of these governments, or whether they be military or whether they be civilian.
Yeah.
You mentioned Sankara, and I remember those days in the 80s when he was in there and was doing progressive things. And actually, a group here in Milwaukee set up a sister city with Ouagadougou and their capital. And so, I mean, there was some, really good feelings of, hey, they're getting somewhere. However, that did not turn out well because the French came in and decided that they had to decide who was going to run the place, and they had him assassinated.
Yes, and they were infiltrated on the highest level. Blaise Compaoré was a leading figure in the Sankara government. He wound up being bribed by the government in Cote d'Ivoire, and he wound up marrying a woman from there. He in turn turned around and overthrew Thomas Sankara. Blaise Compaoré stayed in power for many years after that, and he was eventually overthrown in a popular uprising.
Right. I
During
mean, but I mean, he had 4 elections, right? I mean,
Yeah,
so I mean, he had more like sort of superficial democratic credentials, right? I mean,
exactly.
well, one way that you can have those credentials and be completely unrepresentative of the popular will is that you could be a puppet of foreign interests, right? You could be constantly bending over and bending the knee to France and the United States and European powers and be just compromising the national sovereignty. So you may be able to win elections, but I mean you look at I mean, we have elections here, and there's many places where they have elections, right? And it's like, and you can see how the elections could be victims of fraud. Votes are suppressed. It's
Or once someone gets elected, they don't care what they do; they just act for their own
they make
interests.
sure the person they want gets elected, and if you have elections where the opposing candidate is assassinated, right? So it's free and fair election, right? So I mean, you just cannot put too much emphasis on that sort of formal structure. I mean, but at the same time, you do kind of want to know what happens if the people don't like the guy, right? I mean, I had a talk. I've mentioned this on the show before. I had a talk many years ago with a classmate back at UWM, who was from I forget which African country he was from, but he says, we like having like a leader like that comes to power through a coup that runs as sort of an autocrat, because if we don't like him, we'll just have a coup against him, and then we'll have a government that we like. Um, and in some ways, there's actually a kind of a sense to that, you know, in some ways, the elected guys that are in there may be completely unrepresentative of the people, but this whole, mystique around having been elected, shows that they have some apparatus to remain in power perpetually, right? Makes them actually less susceptible to the popular will. Um, I mean, I just think it's a difficult question in some ways for someone who's coming up from this sort of European perspective, where you're trained on formal democracy being the, kind of the most important thing, and then finding that, that maybe it just doesn't work that way everywhere.
No, it doesn't. And even in this country,
Doesn't look that way here sometimes. Look at what we're
right?
going through.
Yeah, even here, I mean, you have a president who claims he has a overwhelming mandate with 49% plus of the popular vote, and a lot of the policies he's enacting is causing widespread discontent, even here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And people are saying, well, this is what people voted for. Well, I don't think so. The majority did, in terms of the way the system is established, but neither candidate got over 50% of the vote. Now, in some countries, you have to have at least 50% plus 51% of the vote. Otherwise, it has to be a runoff election. But we don't have those provisions here in the United States. So you can win with the plurality of the vote. And if you have a majority in Congress, you can do all kinds of things, as we have seen over the last 110 days.
Right.
Yeah, and if you ignore the courts, that helps too. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. You can't ignore the courts, and that's very democratic.
right. I mean, one of the things that actually I think is kind of a good thing that our democratic system has come up with is this independent judiciary. I think that's helpful, right? Although you can, if you have a judiciary that's like completely politicized, it's I don't know. It's just, but the most important thing, is, I think it really is important to have democracy. I just don't think it's important to necessarily have the formal structures that we have here for that. So I mean, it looks like this guy, this Ibrahim Traore, right? Looks like he's popular, right? It looks like
Yes.
he's doing a lot of good things for the people. I think that's going to earn him a lot of popularity. He, the government. I mean, he stepped in after another guy who was there from the same kind of series of coups, and then they had another guy who was like, the protege of Blaise Compaoré, right? One of the two elected presidents they've had. And it's like, and the guys that were elected were no good, and everyone hated them, and now they're gone, and now you're seeing something. Traore is kind of telegraphing where he's coming from by erecting statues of Thomas Sankara, and you look at the program of the state, it looks just great, you know. And one other thing I just want to throw on, because this flew by so quick when you're talking about these these Islamist rebels that are there, right? That are attacking the state, right? You only have to look right now at Syria and see like that's not what the people are going to want, right? I mean we could talk about that particular movement, but it seems like that, though we've seen how that type of group can be just used as a foreign tool, built up to undermine a state, built up to keep a military presence there. We saw for years that there was this growing foreign military presence in these Sahel states where they were supposedly fighting off these Islamist groups, and the Islamist groups just kept growing, and they weren't being resolved, right? And maybe now things will get fixed there, or maybe the U.S. will be funneling more money to those groups under the table. I mean, because I suspect that's really what's happening.
Yes, in Mali, for example, it was uncovered last year that Ukraine were supplying one of the rebel groups there, which claims to be Islamist, with weapons and training and logistical support. That came out. It was exposed. The U.S. said nothing about it.
Wait a
Ukrainians,
minute. Ukraine is funneling. They claim they don't have enough weapons for themselves, and they're funneling weapons there.
To fight the
to
Russians.
rebels in Mali.
Yeah,
And
right.
because
the Wagner
Russian
group
advisors.
is in those countries, right, defending them from Islamist terrorists,
Okay.
and therefore, Ukraine, if they fund the Islamist terrorists as part of the broader war, right? I mean, I think part of what
It makes no sense.
I think it makes sense, and our guest can comment on this, right? In some sense, all these different wars all over the place are connected, right? They may not be 100% firmly connected. There may be contradictions here and there, but if you kind of look at it in the broader picture, they're all related, right?
It seems like a stretch.
There is all kind of one big war going on, and it's like, and those are the sides, right? You've got the U.S. is always on this side, and Israel's always on this side, and Ukraine's always on this side, and then on the other side you've got Russia, and you've got all these now you've got Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali that are all and the U.S. doesn't like it, right? Because they're on the bad side in every one of these places.
Yeah, and this triggered a diplomatic breaking with the AES states and Ukraine. So it shows that these developments have international implications, but it is a way of justifying what they're doing in regard to providing weapons and training to Islamist rebels because they're fighting against Mali, which is a country that has attempted to break with the West. So it's really an unfortunate situation, but that is the reality of what's going on. And you talk about weapons shortages in Ukraine. It's been even reports of this has even been done in the Western media, and some have been suppressed in terms of the corruption that is going on there and the selling of weapons to other countries for profit. So these things are going on.
So is
all
it
the time.
something that the government in Ukraine is doing, or is it someone under the table just funneling these weapons out because they want to make a buck?
It appears as if it's officially sanctioned by the government in Ukraine because they view the growing alliance between the Sahel states and other states too, with Russia as being a threat to the war that's being waged in Ukraine, which is aimed at bringing Ukraine into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
I mean, the motto is the same as you hear in the United States a lot. It's fight them there so we don't have to fight them here, right? Keep Russia occupied and its other places where it's militarily involved, and then we won't have so much to deal with here in Ukraine. The problem is it doesn't.
Pretty far afield.
Well, it's hard to like make that jibe only just because Russia is so big and it has the capacity to work in many places at once, right? It's a big country. It can be in Syria and in which is it's unfortunately that it was not able to have the support from the local government that it needed to like act where it needed to, but it's it was carrying a lot of weight in a lot of different places around the world, and it still is. And I mean, it's for whatever reason, Russia has been one of these countries that's actually been overall geopolitically mostly on the right side, whereas the U.S. is being mostly on the wrong side, and those two trends seem to reinforce each other, right? Because the U.S. has to go in and attack wherever Russia is and try to undermine Russia wherever it is, so it winds up on the wrong side of anywhere where Russia's on the right side, and Russia goes and defends its friends. So.
Yeah, it seems like a new manifestation, 21st century form of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's how it's playing itself out. For example, there was a conference between the Alliance of Sahel States and the Russian Federation that took place last month. And there were a number of issues that were discussed about the security of that region and the role of Russia in ensuring their security. So yes, this is going on. And of course, these jihadist rebels, as was mentioned earlier, have been the ground troops for the imperialists. In Libya, we saw that 14 years ago in 2011, where Libya was being bombed in order to provide avenues for the advancement of these rebels. And what have they done in the last 14 years in Libya? They've destroyed the country. They can't even form
It's
a
been torn apart.
unified government. No. Syria, we saw with the collapse of the government late last year, what has been happening, the harassment of various groups inside the country. And who knows how long that arrangement is going to last.
Massacres of Alawites and Christians,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the entire coastal area was, they were going around from house to house, pulling people out and killing them. I mean, what's been going on
And Libya was really torn apart into different,
little warlords and so
yeah,
forth,
yeah,
and open
little
air slave
sections.
markets show
Yeah,
up
right.
again. I mean, it's these countries are just utterly ruined, and I mean, the U.S. has become just such a force for evil in U.S. foreign and in its foreign policy all around the world. Um, and it doesn't change from administration to administration. I mean, there's different things that come up and go down this way and that way, but the general sweep of it is the same. Whether it's Republican in office or a Democrat in office. Well, let me ask though. One of the things I was thinking about when I was sort of reading about a little bit of this earlier today, you have a lot of these kind of like propaganda tropes that are kind of used to justify regime change, right? So you see, these reports that say that, Burkina Faso has mobilized these sort of like, sort of civil guards, these sort of volunteers to sort of, defend the state, and there's some accusations that they have gone around and engaged in ethnic violence against the Fulani ethnic group there. You've got allegations that oh look, they nationalized all the gold and they're making the government rich, but what have they done? They're not distributing any of the wealth to the people, right? Which is kind of a crazy thing, but you kind of hear that with, oh, the central government is enriching itself and the people aren't benefiting from it. You've heard that, a variation of that with Hamas all the time. You hear some of these same kind of tropes over and over and over again, but I'm wondering, whether that makes that big a difference with the current administration, which seems like a lot of them just don't care about selling these things like as moral ventures at all. They just sort of like, we'll
Can we
just
make
do
a
it.
buck?
No. I'm saying what I'm saying is they don't have the finesse that the Democrats did to kind of use all these kind of like propaganda tools. So just you saw that one group chat with Vance is in there saying, wait, do we want to do this? We haven't prepared the ground for this. The people aren't going to like this. And it's like, no one else in the Trump administration seems to be thinking that way. They're not thinking about, okay, here's how we kind of build antipathy to a regime that we want to coup, right? Here's how we build support for regime change. They're just kind of like, well, who should we go attack today? It seems like they don't have that they don't care about that whole toolbox, and so it's like, has the game changed so much? I mean, are we have to worry about them not following the old playbook and just like doing something crazy before the ground has been worked, right? I mean, I was kind of just thinking of that today. I haven't worked out a whole theory of this or anything, but I'm interested in your insights.
I think the form may have changed, but in essence, it's fundamentally the same. You noticed people in the United States, even some who claim to be on the left, supported Trump over Kamala Harris, thinking that Trump would scale back the Pentagon, he would end the war in Ukraine.
He was claiming to be a
That
peace candidate. Yeah, he was
Yes,
claiming, oh, yeah,
what a contradiction.
yeah.
And then he
Right.
gets in office and he imposes all these sanctions, which are really not sanctions, but tariffs. They really act as if they're sanctions, um, which are really acts of war. Anytime you impose that type of tariffs regime on Canada, the largest trading partner of the United States, threats to colonize Greenland,
Yeah, that's
recolonize
just
Panama.
insane.
All these things are dangerous, making Canada the 51st state. Now, Mark Carney was in Washington today, and he said Canada was not for sale. Trump said,
Good
we don't
point.
need your cars. The demarcation line between the two countries are artificial. These are all hostile statements that are being made by Trump.
We had a treaty that settled the U.S. Canada border, right? I mean, we actually did. That actually was a, what was it, like the J Treaty, right? I mean, one of these treaties, right, that set the exact longitude line and the little divots in there.
I don't think they have any concern for international law.
No one told Trump.
Well, yeah, I mean, they have free trade agreements with all these countries that they're like imposing suddenly tariffs on them, right? I mean, it's like
they've been thrown out.
They spend the last since World War II, right, developing this whole regime of free trade so they can get their products everywhere and break down all these quote unquote artificial barriers to trade, which basically means imposing our policy model on all these other places and having access to all their resources so we can just extract without paying anything to anybody there. And it's like, after we set up this entire regime, we just say, you know what? Forget free trade. We're just going to throw away every single agreement that we've constructed over the last 70 years, and we're just going to start taxing everything that you send to our country. And it's just astonishing, right? I mean, yeah, because they are sanctions.
It has stunned a lot of governments.
Right.
It has. Friends of the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, Canada was shocked. The British, they're trying to hold back.
Panama was shocked when they found out that Trump wants to take back the Panama Canal.
Yes, right. And to use Greenland, even though they have U.S. troops there, just to take it over completely from
I'm
the
sure
Kingdom of
Greenland
Denmark.
and Denmark are both shocked on that one.
Yeah, and the majority of the people there are indigenous people in Greenland. So that gets lost in the whole discussion. But yes, these things are going on. So it's a lot of hostility that's been created by this government. In Africa, for example, right now they're negotiating recognizing Somaliland, which is a breakaway region in northeastern Somalia, in exchange for the taking over or the building of a military base on the port there in Berbera. In the DRC in the east, they're talking about some type of peace agreement that will be guaranteed by U.S. troops, possibly U.S. troops. I don't know if they're going to be private military forces in exchange for access to critical minerals. So these things are going on, as we speak, even though the administration promotes this image that it is not in favor of new military adventures and they want to end the ones that exist now. But under what terms? Right. Under what terms are they going to end the war in Ukraine? It's still not clear to me.
It all comes down to what they can extract from it,
Exactly.
what they can get.
Right. Well, I mean, they're. I mean, I think the problem there is they're not going to do anything because what's going to happen is Trump is going to think that he can go in and get everything he wants just by talking tough, and it's like the U.S. just doesn't have the capacity, right? We don't have the power. We don't have the cards that we used to have, and it's worse with him tariffing all of our allies, right? I mean, it's like he's breaking everything everywhere he goes, and it just all these plans of making all these deals, they're just like none of the deals are getting made because because it's like it's just there's no sense or order that everyone knows that if we make a deal with Trump anyway, he'll just break it tomorrow anyhow because he just broke every single rule that we had. He's shown that he doesn't care about any of them. Why would you make a deal with him, right? You're going to make a deal with someone else who's going to trust to make a deal with you, and he's like throwing power around that he doesn't have there to throw, right? And it's like And it's just embarrassing because every time he tries something and it fails, it just proves how weak he is. This has been just a critical moment for weakening the U.S. empire. Um, and as part of what I was saying before, it's like none of these actions did they go about it in like a very concerted, logical, smart way, preparing the ground for an advance, explaining this is why we have to do what we're going to do, building up antipathy to the people that we're going to attack next. No, it's instead of like having a months long campaign to demonize Canada or demonize Denmark. Instead, we just like, oh, well, we'll attack Canada on Thursday and Denmark on Friday, and we'll attack all of our allies at once. And it's like without any sort of preparation at all. It's like, the people that were in there before knew how to do evil, nasty stuff in a way that they could kind of slide it through and make it seem like it was justified. And, Trump is just like, well, my people will back me up. They'll believe anything I tell them, right? I'll just do whatever I feel like, and I don't have to follow any of those rules or any of those like best practices for running an empire.
I think the closing, for example, of the Voice of America is a good example. The suspension of aid for the Agency for International Development.
Right.
Uh, all of those things are indication of what you were just saying. I mean, these were utilized as propaganda mechanisms to convince people that U.S. had good intentions all over the world. And today, I don't hear that type of propaganda coming out of the administration. It's just, we are the best, we are superior, come to us. He claimed on April 2nd, right, that countries will be running to Washington, D.C. to cut deals based upon the interests of the U.S. That has not happened. The Chinese, in their own state media, saying there's no talks that are going on in regard to a trade deal. And that's probably true in many other geopolitical regions as well.
Right. I mean, you have countries that were expected to, were trying to bully, Japan into like, divorcing itself completely from China and like going completely with the U.S. and Japan is like just doubling down in the opposite direction. Now, all these countries are like running to China because China is stable, right? China is very, very stable. In China, you can expect that you'll be exactly the same in another 1,000 years, right? China is like noted for its slowness and stability, and it'll abstain. It'll just keep on following the same path, right? And the U.S. right now is like, what crazy thing are they going to do next week, right? There's no way to count on the U.S. for the future, right? So all these countries are going to, the entire Asian region now, they're like all doing the exact opposite, right? They're all dumping their treasury bills. They're all like, lining up to sign deals with China, and like, just no one wants to run the United States.
Not only Asia. I mean, China has been doing a lot of development in Africa with the whole Belt and Road Initiative. And in the Middle East, they've been doing the same thing. And I believe they've mentioned helping Burkina Faso with the I may have this wrong, with developing a nuclear just for nuclear power
Yes,
nuclear system.
exactly. Exactly. And if you look at the development assistance from China, for example, they built the the new headquarters for the African Union. They are constructing a new headquarters for the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They've been building
Oh, that sounds positive.
high-speed rail lines in various countries. These are infrastructural projects that people can utilize. So I think that's the distinction, part of the distinction between Chinese foreign policy in Africa and U.S. foreign policy in Africa, which is pretty much designed to extract resources, to create space for U.S. military adventures, and also to mobilize public opinion in support of the U.S. Like there was a lot of pressure on the African Union countries to support the U.S. position in Ukraine under the Biden administration.
Wow.
And it didn't work in most cases. So This is the contradiction of what's going on right now. So we
Yeah.
don't know what's really going to happen in the U.S. I mean, we see all this economic chaos. The word is uncertainty, and the stock market is having a hell of a time. Uh, the tariffs are creating so much confusion inside the country. So we're going to see what happened in the next few weeks and the next few months here,
I
and its impact on the world.
Yeah, I want to go back to China and Africa. I remember one of the African leaders. I don't remember who it was said this, but he says whenever the G7 comes here, we get a lecture. Whenever China comes here, we get a power plant. We get a highway. We get a high speed rail system. I mean, it was these types of things that you were mentioning. They're building these things everywhere, right? They're contributing to the infrastructure. They're making deals with all these countries that seem, I mean, I don't know if they're completely fair deals, but they are so much more transparently even than the deals that the U.S. would impose on these countries. Um,
Yeah, well, even the so-called Chinese debt trap, even Bloomberg News, which is a bankers news
Mm-hmm.
agency. They have a TV station and they print, a lot of material. Said it was a myth. There was no such thing. This was about 3 years ago. They issued a report. This is Bloomberg News who issued this investigative report that the notion of a Chinese debt trap in Africa did not exist. So when you have even other capitalist entities that do the research and come back and
Yeah,
say,
that
"Yeah,
is
no,
something.
this is not true,"
I,
it's
I,
quite amazing.
I mean, you've got the entire monetary system. You have like this whole reserve currency being the dollar being used
Mm-hmm.
to like make all these loans to these African countries that need to be paid back in dollars, which means they need to gather up foreign currency, which means they need to get all these more deals with the United States, and that is part of the trap, right? This whole use of the U.S. currency, right? And then China comes along and says, well, we'll deal with in local currency. We'll deal in our own currency. We'll deal in new international currencies. We're gonna start up the BRICS Bank. We have our new exchange system, which is like, the SWIFT used to be number one. Now the Chinese system is the number one. They have all these alternate systems that are building up now to get around like the U.S. kind of dollar imperialism, and it's like that is such a gift to the rest of the world. And the way they're I mean, I'm probably singing the praises of China too much because it's not a perfect country, but it's the way it has developed so many technologies, particularly green energy, solar power, all the things that it's doing, and those things are going to Africa too, right? It's they have
Yeah, and they're the fact that they're leading in renewable energy, and have been now for many years, meaning the People's Republic of China, is a strong testament that they realize that there is a climate crisis,
Mm-hmm.
which this administration denies that it
Yes.
even exists.
the
This is the danger of an administration that we have right now in Washington, D.C., and they've withdrawn, from the Paris Climate Agreement. They've withdrawn from the World Health Organization. All
yeah.
these international programs and protocols, they're withdrawing from them. They believe that the United States ruling class can live in a world by itself. And that's just not the reality of what's going on today
I
in the
Yeah,
world.
you'd
it,
think they would have learned something from COVID that, you know,
Yes.
even if you rich, you still may be susceptible to
Worse
things
off.
like that. Yeah.
yeah, you can still get sick,
We had
but
more deaths in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world
Mm-hmm.
during the
Wow.
pandemic.
I mean, I just think if I were a leader of one of these like small island nations like Vanuatu or Tonga or Kiribati or Nauru, I'd be like thanking China for its global climate consciousness because my country is getting smaller every year as the water rises,
Right.
and China's the only thing that is saving me, right? They're. I mean, it's just China is. I mean, they are doing so much to like bring everyone to their side without bombing them all, right? Who is China bombed, right? The U.S. bombs everybody and like forces everyone to be our friend, and that is running out. And I mean, I think there's there's going to be spasms of some really horrible stuff as the reality catches up with the United States. But I just see so much kind of outflow of power from the United States to Africa and to China and to all these other places, and I think that is going to be so good for the world in the long run.
Yeah, when you hear the slogan "Make America Great Again," what does that really mean? When was it ever really, really all that? Because if you look, legalized segregation was still the order of the day 60 years ago in large parts of the United States. There were places you couldn't go. They still had signs that said colored and white. All of this was going on. So when was the America great during that time period?
They're looking at it great for a certain elite.
Well, I think there are people that would say that America was great during some of those times because it had a lot of good things that were still going for it, right? A lot of the and it was at least seemed like it was making forward progress in all the areas that you're talking about, right? Because if you can have segregation, but if you have the civil rights movement, it still feels like there's something great here there because you're moving forward, right? So I think there's this sort of lost sense that at least at one point in the time we were moving forward. Now I know most of the Trump supporters probably don't think the civil rights movement is really
I don't think that's
anyway.
I don't think but I mean nostalgic for the 1960s.
Right. I know.
I don't think so.
But I mean that there if you're looking for a sense of where the United States was ever great, it was probably great through the fact that it was at some point bad, but at least moving in the right direction. And I think everyone has a different idea of what that right direction might be, but I think that one thing that is kind of common between the Trump people and a much broader segment of society is that we have lost that kind of forward movement.
I think going backwards is not necessarily the best thing. And when you look at, for example, their views on the international trading system, it's unsustainable. If you look at an automobile, for example, within that automobile, you have parts that are produced in different parts of the world. So if you impose tariffs on those parts, that's automatically going to raise the rate of the cost for vehicles and other consumers.
We spent 70 years, right, trying to create this global free trade structure so that we could get the best, cheapest part, that one little part of your car comes from this country, and one little part comes from this country, and one little part from this country, and the car only runs because it's getting parts from 130 different countries. And then after building that model and adapting to that model for the last 75 years so that everything is set up that way, we suddenly say, oh, we're not going to do it that way anymore. We don't spend any money to revise how we make cars, design new plants, build new supply chains. We just suddenly one day say, nope, we're going to snap our fingers and that's going to be gone. And it's like, well, you can get rid of the current system, but that is not going to create a new system in its place. You can just destroy it. You're not building anything. That actually takes time. And it just feels like so much of what the current administration is doing is not just evil, right? But it's just childishly stupid. I mean, it's just,
And it has evil effects. It has some really negative effects. Not only here, but that could destroy a lot of economies. It could bring about a worldwide recession or depression.
And more wars.
And more wars, yeah.
If you look even at the situation in Ukraine, I don't see them turning over all their critical minerals to the U.S. corporations in exchange for what? I don't think Trump is committed to additional military assistance to Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Ukraine is going to have control of many of its minerals at the end of the war. I mean, it's like
probably not.
There is this sort of I think internal battle in Ukraine between the people that kind of see the writing on the wall and want to save part of the country by ending the war, even if it's a harder pill to swallow, and those that want to like push and push and push and push to keep it going as Ukraine gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the final piece that's going to be created. It's like if that group that is waving the blue and gold flags gets their way, it's just going to mean that the final state of Ukraine is going to be a smaller and smaller and smaller Ukraine. I mean, it's perverse to what they're seeking, but that's, I think, the effect that they're going to have, right? Because the longer they say, we have to support this ongoing war and not capitulate to the Russians, the smaller the country is going to be when it finally ends the war and capitulates to the Russians. I mean, that's just, it's not gonna,
I don't think they're going to get back a lot of the land in the Donbass.
No.
I don't believe they'll get back Crimea. So what are they willing to settle for is the question. And will that be a sustainable and long-lasting peace?
I mean, the way it's going, I mean, it's like, if they can succeed in keeping Ukraine like, steadfast in not negotiating and not accepting any concessions, they're going to lose Kryvyi Rog, they're going to lose Odessa, they're going to lose Dnipropetrovsk. They're just going to lose Kharkov. They're going to lose. Sumy. They're just going to keep losing stuff until it's done, right? And it's anyhow. But I'm glad we had you here to talk about Africa.
Yes.
One thing we didn't get a chance to mention was the pressure that's being put on South Africa, because it
most definitely,
what it has done as far as taking Israel to court. But I guess that will have to probably be for next time.
Well, you jump in and tell us something about it for a minute, but then we're going to...
Well, just to mention that they expelled the ambassador to the United States. A new one has not yet been appointed, but this had nothing to do with his criticisms of the Trump administration. It had everything to do with the legal and political campaign that the government has been waging there against the genocide in Gaza. So people need to be clear on that. And they hate, any country that takes the opposite position in terms of the situation in West Asia and the situation in Ukraine. South Africa has done both. So we'll see what happens in the not too distant future in relationship to U.S. Pretoria interventions.
Their position has been to send peace delegations, right? Their position has been to go and send people and talk to both sides. I mean, this is the horrible crime that they've committed, right?
And
I mean,
they've taken Israel to court. I mean, that's a legal thing, They're doing
International
it.
Court of Justice.
Yeah, they're doing it in a positive legal manner, and
exactly,
right,
paying the cost for it.
Yeah, heavily.
Okay.
Heavily. So. Yeah. So anyway, people need to keep reading about these issues. There's a ton of YouTube videos about what's going on in Burkina Faso and the Alliance of Sahel States. People can check those out for free. They could also read Pan-African Newswire and other sources about what's going on in that region.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Abayomi
Thank
Azikiwe.
you for the invitation. Keep up the good work.
Always great having you.
All right.
Bye.